Okay, folks, I think in the interest of time, we'll start. So, welcome everybody to our monthly NIHA seminar. We have two speakers today, Kelly Lindsay and Jean Craig. Kelly will start us off. Kelly, thank you for joining us. Kelly is a member of our NIHA exec group. And just to introduce Kelly a little, Kelly is the founder of the Norfolk-based charity Friend Indeed, which Kelly will speak to us about today. She graduated from Liverpool John Moores University with a BSc in sports science, has had a very varied work life, beginning in business, then seeing the error of ways and moving into health and education and becoming a personal trainer and PE teacher, until setting up the charity Friend Indeed. And this charity has gained charity status in 2018 and supports older people in care homes and dementia units across the east of England. She volunteers for various charities in addition to Friend Indeed, and volunteers for charities that support young people in the care system, and is a proud dementia champion for the Alzheimer's Society. And Kelly is going to talk to us today about the benefits of intergenerational relationships, a really fascinating topic. So, Kelly, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that introduction, Anne-Marie. It's lovely to be here with you all, and I'd like to thank Nia for the opportunity to talk to you all today. So, as was previously said, my name's Kelly Lindsay, and I run the Norfolk-based charity Friend Indeed. Bianca's kindly going to manage the slides for me, so if we could move on to the next slide, please. What I'd like us to consider today is the benefits of intergenerational relationships and friendships to encourage healthy ageing and to support people living with dementia. Next slide, please. So Friend Indeed is an intergenerational charity. Everything we do is about connecting younger and older people and bringing those people together. And our primary aims are to reduce loneliness and to promote kindness. Next slide, please. So one of our main schemes involved pre-pandemic babies, toddlers and young children going into care homes on a weekly basis. And we had some parents and childminders that would attend every single week and some that would go monthly and less frequently. But for those that attended weekly or fortnightly, we saw some incredible friendships develop. And one of the strongest we saw was these lovely photos you can see here. A gentleman called Stanley, who was a resident at Chiswick House Care Home in Norwich, and a little boy, Vinny. And what was wonderful is Stanley actually first knew of Vinny when he was actually growing in his mum's tummy, because his big brother Oliver used to visit. And literally the friendship these guys had was just, I mean, you can't really even convey it in words. You had to see it. But they shared so many special moments together. And from the moment Vinny could walk and then begin to run, he would walk into the care home, put his arms above his head and run down the corridor shouting Stanley. And if you can imagine being an older person in a care home, Stanley was fortunate. He had a really large family, including different generations, grandchildren and beyond, that would visit him regularly. But when it's a completely separate person in the community that's gone out of their way to make this friendship, to try and make a difference in someone's life, the weight it carries is magnificent. And sadly, we did lose Stanley at the start of this year. And myself and Vinny's mum attended the funeral, and we're really close with Stanley's family still. We provided a great deal of comfort for them. And as Stanley's daughter described it, these visits and his friendship with Vinny gave him a new lease of life when he was living in a care home. Next slide, please. So we exist to promote kindness and reduce loneliness, and we're one of only a handful of charities across the country that are actually tackling the disconnection between generations in our communities. And it's an issue that goes to the heart of isolation, loneliness and social cohesion challenges across the UK. Next slide, please. So all of you will recognise that loneliness is something that has been spoken about much more in the last particularly sort of couple of years, but up to 5 years, and it is a public health crisis. We have an ageing population, and that means more and more of us will be at risk of loneliness as we grow old, either finding ourselves alone for long periods of time or suffering health issues that require residential or full-time care. And some of you will probably be familiar with the statistics around this, but loneliness and lack of social interaction not only affects mental well-being, but has proven to negatively impact cardiovascular health risks and increase death rates, blood pressure, depression, and the risk of dementia. And it's a vicious circle, as ill health is also a leading trigger of loneliness. So that could come from the loneliness, or it could come from ill health that spirals into loneliness. People who lack a sense of connection to their neighbourhood are 3 times more likely to suffer from frequent loneliness, and people who have been widowed are 5 times more likely. So if we imagine some of these people moving into a care home, feeling that disconnection that they'll naturally get just moving into the care sector, and imagine the impact that can have on their physical and mental well-being, but then you've got a little boy like Vinny running down the corridor shouting your name, I'm sure you can imagine just how much of an impact that does have on people. The problem with loneliness is growing. The number of over 50s suffering from loneliness is set to reach 2 million by 2025, 2026, and that's compared with around 1.4 million in 2016-17. It's an increase of 49% in 10 years. Obviously, we have to recognise population growth and the ageing population, but the impact of loneliness on mortality rates is comparable to smoking and obesity. So it is a health crisis. Next slide, please. So this is kind of why I set up a charity. I believe fully that kindness is a very powerful tool. The simple commonplace notion of kindness really betrays how powerful it is to be kind. The truth is that practicing and receiving kindness has proven benefits to our mental and physical well-being, as well as the creation of greater social cohesion. Being kind to others can be transformational for our emotional well-being. It's proven to reduce stress, improve mood, build self-esteem, and drive overall happiness. This then has multiple benefits on our physical health, with studies citing benefits to blood pressure, energy levels, pain relief, and overall vitality and longevity. And we can get better at it. So Dr. Richie Davidson of the University of Wisconsin says, like weight training, we found that people can actually build up their compassion muscle and respond to others suffering with care and a desire to help. And it's also infectious. So people who witness acts of kindness are more likely to be kind themselves, which means the kinder we are, the kinder the world around us becomes. And at Friend Indeed, that's one of the main things we're doing. We're trying to get young people from babies to toddlers to school-aged children to recognise and think about how they can be kind from a young age. And I firmly believe that that will have a knock-on effect as these children grow into young adults and beyond. So kindness is choosing to do something that helps others or yourself, motivated by genuine warm feelings. Next slide, please. So our experience bridges working with people on both sides of the divide. I'll just talk through the photo there. This was at a Norfolk Day celebration approximately 3.5, 4 years ago. We hosted those at Norwich School. We would have residents from local care homes, some older people from the community, people living with dementia, and then we had school children from Norwich School, local families with children, childminders, and just had a party. But the difference it makes having the different generations there is really, really special. For me to set up the charity, it was first-hand experience of noticing the divide between generations, and my background in teaching, my volunteer roles. I'd always volunteered for Age Concern, Age UK, and as a dementia champion for the Alzheimer's Society, I see the benefit that children have when they interact with people living with dementia, whether that's quite mild, whether it's early onset, or whether it's very advanced. Children being in their presence really has a positive impact. And from a personal perspective, my nan went into a care home 12 years ago. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and me being a very close granddaughter to her was fantastic and helped. And the care home she was in was very caring, but there just wasn't enough involvement from the community. When you bring younger and older people together, it benefits both age groups. So it's good for young people to learn about things. And we now work as a charity across 4 counties, predominantly in Norfolk, but also Suffolk, Essex and Cambridgeshire, again with those main aims of promoting kindness and reducing loneliness. And I'll go on to explain why I believe acting and behaving in those ways and bringing the community together can benefit people's desire to age healthily. Next slide, please. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we do. We run various intergenerational schemes. They have had to change quite a lot because of the pandemic, and we went on to sort of switch how we did things and moved a lot of things online, as most people did. If you could pop on to the next slide, please, Bianca. So we use a range of activities that spark these genuine and long-lasting relationships and friendships. So sometimes The interactions are very conversational based and just involve a little bit of play. And then we've had more formal organised sessions that might be sharing a science activity, baking. And when older and younger people are doing those things together, you just see these really special moments. I remember at a care home in Lowestoft when a lady with very advanced dementia, who very, very much didn't communicate, couldn't really speak. She was sat with a school child. And as the school child was drawing and she started to make a circle, the delight in this older lady's face that could see she was then producing a circle, and she really sort of came out of herself and interacted with that. We've done things like intergenerational parties, pen pal projects, but again, that simplicity of just having a chat and more of a befriending service can make a massive difference. Next slide, please. So why do we believe that intergenerational friendships can promote healthy ageing? Well, first of all, I've been doing this for 5 years. We've been a registered charity for 3 years, and I've seen it. I've seen the benefit it has on everyone's well-being, let alone if you're an older person coming towards your latter years. But we've also had quite a lot of anecdotal feedback from care homes. We haven't got an abundance of scientific and statistical based evidence, but that's something we're hopefully going to improve on. Particularly with our link with UEA, it would be good if we can have support from academics in this area. But I don't know if any of you ever saw a programme called A Care Home for 4-year-olds. It was on the television over 4 years ago. And it was very fortunate when that came on TV, because I'd set Friend Indeed up 6 months before. So I already had regular volunteers taking babies and toddlers into care homes. And this programme on Channel 4 had children going into care homes regularly, and then they monitored some of the clinical areas for the residents living there. They looked at their grip strength, their mobility, and also things like depression scores. And all of the negative scores, such as depression, went down. All of the physical scores around mobility and movement and strength went up, simply because these children were spending time with them. It encouraged more movement. So when we asked care home managers if the impact of Friend Indeed services has a positive impact on wellbeing, 100% answered yes. Obviously, this is a small population that we spoke to, but good results, but certainly could be more. Next slide, please. So this was a question we posed to care home managers. What changes have you seen in residents after engaging with Friend Indeed's activities or volunteers? So this was also particularly about the children going into the home. So one care home manager said that it's something to take an interest in. Kelly's been fantastic relating to the lockdown. So this is where we changed our services. So the first thing I did, instead of children going in weekly, was started a weekly newsletter. And in there we'd feature information about the children going back to school, or pictures of little visitors and what they were doing on their days out, just to try and keep those connections strong. And for older people to see these images of cute babies and children enjoying themselves, that helped them smile. But obviously when the children were going in, this particular manager has said it was wonderful to see the positive reactions from residents. Positive changes in mood, and in general, physically, residents became more active. Residents become more engaged, more alert and more aware. Sense of fulfillment, more energised, lifted mood and excitement for visits. Raises their spirits and puts a positive vibe in the home. And to me, that's one I've noticed. I've been in care homes waiting for children to arrive, and the mood's quite calm and slow, but potentially a bit mundane. And then these young people walk in and everyone's spirits are lifted, including people of my age and the care staff working there. Friend Indeed promote pure joy amongst our residents. Now, to me, that's a really fascinating statement, because if we think about ageing healthily, to want to age healthily, you have to have a desire to want to live longer. And if you're unhappy or you're profoundly unwell and don't feel you're getting the support, you're going to have less desire to do so. So if you can create moments of pure joy, I'd like to think that those people experiencing that joy will want to live longer and will want to be healthier. They reduce feelings of loneliness and stimulate positive conversations, which promote well-being. More energy, even in people in their 90s. And these are really lovely points: smiling, increased chat, interaction, reminiscence, sharing stories. And again, that's particularly profound for people living with dementia. For people living with dementia, interacting with children can help them remember their old childhood and spark old memories. Improve mood, increase feelings of purpose and self-worth. I mean, you can't get more important than that. Improvements in short-term memory, increased engagement from people living with dementia. Next slide, please. For residents that regularly engage in Friend Indeed activities, how do you feel it benefits their health, both mental and physical? It gives residents a sense of purpose. So this to me is, again, a really big thing to consider. I think regardless of your age, if you don't have a sense of purpose, you're not necessarily going to want to age healthily. So if we can help give people more purpose, we'll hopefully again encourage healthy living. They want little visitors and they're excited to see them. Although during the visiting restriction, the physical visits have not happened, the residents still engage very well with other joint activities. So we've done things like posted activities into care homes, posted them to children in the community. They've both taken part, and then we've been able to share photos via email, via the newsletter, and online of both age groups taking part. So it encourages them to stay connected in activities. Makes them feel part of something that people in the community care. And again, I think that's particularly important for people going into care homes. They can feel very isolated from the wider community, but knowing that local people in their community still care about them is really important. Mental health has improved in the sense of mood, and physically residents are more likely to get involved. So increasing physical movement, really important, psychological and physical boost to well-being. Our residents love the little visitor sessions. They get a lot of enjoyment out of the interaction. For those residents without families, it gives them a chance to experience the joy of little ones. So I've seen this where some people didn't have families of their own, and to learn how to interact with children and have something they've never experienced is really important. But if we think back to one of the earlier slides with Stanley and Vinny, Stanley had plenty of family. They visited him regularly. Most of the time I was in the care home, his daughter was there and generations below. But again, when it's a person that's coming out of their own home from the community, taking time to build up a friendship with this person, it's really, really profound, the impact it has. By taking away their loneliness and encourages them to use their mind, this keeps their spirits up, which in turn will help their mental health. Huge positive impact, increased feeling of purpose, promotes self-worth, and it gives such a purpose in life. It's so heartwarming to see. Next slide, please. Do you think that Friend Indeed services and activities could result in less strain on NHS services? So this is obviously quite an interesting one. If this is what care home managers have said back to us. If residents remain engaged and particularly active, it may stop depression, which leads to not eating, drinking, which could then lead to urine infections and other health implications. Friend Indeed provides a service that helps residents improve their quality of life, emotionally, physically, and mentally. This automatically has an impact on the residents' general well-being and their day-to-day activities. This can, of course, help medically, which will result in less strain on NHS services. Yes, because of improved mental health. Possibly, if benefits outlined above could keep people more well in a natural and holistic way. Yes, we saw less behavioural concerns on days with our little visitors, and I'll give you some examples of people living with dementia who were very unsettled and then become calmer and happier when children are in their company. Positive impact and occupying the mind will help mentally and physically, which in turn should help NHS services. Yes, possibly boosting people's well-being and improved health. Yes, would reduce the symptoms of loneliness and depression in the elderly and reducing mental health issues and self-neglect. And the service that Friend Indeed provides must absolutely take pressure from the NHS. This service is invaluable. Next slide, please. So then if we look at it from the other perspective, so the final career I had before I set up Friend Indeed was I was a teacher. I was teaching in mainstream schools initially, secondary, but I had experience in primary as well. And I finished teaching in schools for children that have been excluded from mainstream school, usually because of severe issues at home. A lot of the children have been in the care sector. And one of the things that really resonated with me was these young people, through generally no fault of their own, had no idea how to be kind or how to be a good member of their communities because they never witnessed it. They weren't empowered by their parents or care, well, hopefully those that went into care, but their younger years had been warped with an impression of the world that isn't very kind, and it's hard to then change that. So one of the care home managers, when talking about how it could benefit children, said a more positive view of aging. So to me personally, if we're thinking about healthy aging, surely the younger we start thinking about that and the more positive view we have of aging, the better. If we see that people can age, and regardless of if they have conditions, they can live with those and still have a happy and important life, I think it will improve everyone's outlook into the aging process. It was an opportunity to learn about empathy and kindness, develop new intergenerational friendships, and increased awareness of people living with dementia. Most people here listening today will have been affected by dementia, or if you haven't, it won't be too far from you or a friend or loved one who's been affected because of the increase in dementia. So the more we know about that, the less fearful we'll be and able to deal with it. Next slide, please. So the main schemes we ran pre-pandemic were little visitors, babies and toddlers, as I said, going into care home face to face. And again, these friendships, you have to see it firsthand. But for the first 6 months to year of setting up Friend Indeed, back in the days when it was literally me and one parent going around a care home, then there'd be a couple. Most of the time, I just spent the whole session trying to not cry because of the overwhelming joy and happiness you saw from a child, just being a child, spending time with these older people in care. You know, it really is phenomenal. You have to see it to believe it. But if any of you after the session want to look up Friend Indeed on our Facebook page and on our website, you'll be able to see old videos, and they're really uplifting things to look at. So I'd ask you to do that. Next slide, please. So we've done a lot with schools. We've set up sessions with schools from deprived areas. We've set up sessions with kids that have come out of mainstream school and are in very complex new educational settings. And all of the things we've done have had such positive impact. I remember with Badgers Wood Care Home in Drayton, we started an intergenerational poetry club with the care home opposite. So we had Drayton Junior School, Badgers Wood Care Home, and I just started by reading out a poem and then asking the school children to sit next to an older person and write a poem about friendship. And we were doing this for 2 weeks, and after the first session, when the children went back to the school, the head teacher contacted me saying the children just won't stop talking about this. They're all in a better mood, they're listening better, they seem to be being kinder, and they just can't wait to go back. And all of them are saying they must sit back next to the same person that they're with next week. So these connections seem to happen very quickly between older and younger people as well, which is quite interesting. And I think scientifically there's probably a lot of reasons for that. Next slide, please. So we've done things like pen pal schemes, and these have been particularly important throughout the pandemic. But the older generation are much more used to my generation and below of putting pen to paper rather than email. And I think all of us can admit that still, if we get a handwritten letter or card from someone, it can tend to carry a little bit more weight because of the extra effort people go to. And we did a lovely project with UEA actually, where a lot of the students became pen pals. And I know there was a really particularly strong connection between a resident at Courton House Care Home in Norwich, in Norwich, and a student who's currently studying medicine. And the lady that she's writing to in the care home had just lost her husband, who'd also been in the care home. And they've just made this wonderful friendship. And we're hoping they can meet face to face. But again, the similarities people can have if they start to get to know each other, it's really wonderful to see. So the Pen Pal project has always been strong. Next slide, please. And then community events. So this was one of the things I loved that we've been able to do in the last 3 years or so. We've been doing more and more community events before the pandemic. Every year we had an intergenerational sports day. And again, until you see it, we hosted these at Norwich School, but when you watch, I watched a lady in her early 90s living with dementia, and she was slightly shuffling along doing an egg and spoon race next to a 3-year-old. And we did that with Norwich School. There will be videos and clips and photos of that. And it's just absolutely wonderful to see. And even people with very severe memory loss living with dementia that wouldn't normally remember things, we've found 3 months, 6 months later, they can still remember this moment where they were doing something like that with a young person. We did Norfolk Day celebrations. We'd even started some community events, like we did a Valentine's Day intergenerational dinner dance where we had live entertainment and all ages there. And I remember one of the residents from a care home stood up and he gave one of the children a rose and then said a big thank you to everyone and how important it was to be out of the care home setting in the community, but with young people. So you really experience the whole community. And finally, our most recent event that we got to do was go and see Dippy the dinosaur. And so we finally got some care home residents out of care homes. And we had just a couple of the Friend Indeed families there who'd been volunteers for quite a few years. And that was just from a safety perspective. Okay, you're fine on this slide, Bianca, thank you. So in our experience, everyone that engages with intergenerational services benefits. The primary beneficiaries of the work are older people and those living with dementia, but there's also lots of other impact. So for care providers, our activity offers care staff a much needed moment of joy in what can otherwise be a highly challenging environment. It also provides reassurance for the families of older residents who may be concerned about the extent of interaction their loved ones experience. And again, I can resonate with that. When my nan was in a care home, I was there as frequently as I could be. But if there had been other things from the community, I know it would have benefited her and probably meant that her dementia progressed less rapidly. Schools that work with us often see a transformational impact on young people who volunteer, many of whom present challenging behaviours. So volunteering with us offers a new pathway to explore better outcomes for those young people. Next slide, please. So this is where we come on to the bit that I think is very interesting and important. If we're talking about healthy ageing, are we potentially considering that when you're 65, 55, when you hit retirement? When does healthy ageing start? Because we're all aging. You've all aged since I've been talking to you here today. So I think what's really interesting about intergenerational friendships is if we can start giving younger people more access to seeing the older generation, to experiencing friendships with them, to understanding the life cycle that we're all inevitably going to go through, it can have a more positive impact. We can also see that older people that go into care homes can still live a really happy and engaging life. And again, I think as younger people grow older and then we go through our midlife and then into our older aging, we'll have a more positive view and be more prepared for some of the changes without necessarily viewing them all as negative. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So what benefit might intergenerational friendships have on the desire of aging healthily? So I've spoken to you a bit about this, but I believe that watching that aging can be fun rather than going in a care home, seeing people sat around doing activities just with people of their own age group. If we have those care homes where children are there as well, it's naturally more joyful. And there's just something very different about different age groups being and sharing the same experience. Increased awareness of the aging process. So again, like I've said, not being as worried. Understanding that you can thrive in a care home rather than just see out your final years. And being shown kindness, having purpose, and not feeling lonely can encourage people to want to live healthier for longer. So that's my overarching thing in this, is that if we create communities that are kinder, we make sure that people have purpose, they will want to age more healthily. And I believe by connecting younger and older people, we would do all of that. How can intergenerational friendships support people living with dementia? So as Anne-Marie said, I'm a dementia champion. I run information sessions that help people become dementia friends and will be affected by dementia. Many of us will go on to develop dementia. One of the things we see when children are in care homes or interacting with people living with dementia is increased reminiscence. People living with dementia will suddenly talk about things from many years ago that they might not have ordinarily thought of. A couple of really big things that I saw in care homes. This was a care home in Hunstanton, and there was a lady sat in a chair, and although she was in a very busy room and the children were also there, she was just staring straight ahead, very vacant, and she was just rocking slightly. And then this 18-month-old boy, maybe slightly older, just went up to her and he put his hand on her hand as she was sat in the chair, and she just suddenly looked at him. Nothing else had brought her out of her sort of stare. She just looked at this child and said, "I love you too, my little friend." So that's pulled her out of a zone that we probably would find no other way to enter. And another thing I saw once was in a care home where children are much more resilient and accepting of situations than potentially adults can be. And children aren't actually particularly fazed by people living with dementia. They might watch some behaviours that they see, but they don't necessarily see them as strange because they don't necessarily have the life experience we do of what might be viewed as normal. And there was a gentleman who was very unsettled in a care home, rocking backwards and forwards quite intensely. And he was making quite a deep, loud noise, which was just like a as he was rocking. And I remember looking at this child thinking, I wonder how they're going to perceive this situation. And the child walked over to the man, stood opposite him, and just started going, and then the man literally just stopped rocking, stopped making this noise, sat back and smiled. And I thought, well, wow, that's a fantastic technique. We probably wouldn't try it as adults, but again, that's what shows that the magic that children can bring that we wouldn't necessarily even think of. But he'd managed to probably communicate with this man in the only way that would calm him down, and it worked immediately. So also for supporting people living with dementia, it gives that purpose again, and it can also empower people. I've seen people living with dementia who can't engage in activities, but then when there's children there, because children are seen as vulnerable, and people living with dementia might still be able to view that a child has a vulnerability, it empowers them to potentially push out of some of their zones of dementia. Obviously, this depends on how advanced the dementia is, but I have seen moments like that, and it's just incredibly interesting to watch. And then there's a distraction element. I'm a firm believer for people living with dementia, particularly when they get into patterns of repetitive behaviour. Distraction's one of the best tools you can use, trying to get them moving and thinking about something else. And children, once again, provide that distraction. Next slide, please. And in a nutshell, that's it. So obviously you can probably hear that I believe intergenerational friendships can have a massive positive impact on people wanting to age healthily. And I believe the important thing we'll be doing as well is helping young people from a young age understand the aging process and give them a greater desire to want to age healthily when they start to feel like they're getting older. And yeah, thank you for listening, and I'd welcome any questions that you have. And if anyone wants to follow up with me after the seminar, you're more than welcome to get in touch.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Really fascinating presentation, and we're really delighted that you guys are part of NIHA. Yeah, I mean, I remember I've read a lot of papers on the Harvard cohort, which have been followed up for 60 or 70 years now, the Nurses' Health Study and the Health Professional Study. And always the number one determinant of survival and healthy life expectancy is social and spiritual connectivity. And as you say, much stronger predictor than smoking status, obesity status. So yeah, I think the evidence is really, really clear-cut and consistent. I mean, you touched on it there, and NIHA is all about sort of connecting up behaviors, because of course we're a composite of all our behaviors rather than an effect of one of our behaviors. Have you done any work, or are you familiar with any work where social connectivity results, for example, in an improvement in eating behavior, or the joining up behaviors rather than just the effect of the social connectivity itself?
Sorry, Anne-Marie, just repeat the phrase you said after social connection, sorry.
I'm interested in, is there any evidence or even anecdotal evidence from the work that you do that people who feel more socially connected or are less lonely, it impacts on other behaviors? For example, it's associated with improved eating behavior.
Yeah, yes, 100%. Again, it's from our perspective, it's very anecdotal. But yes, I think to me, I'm a 40-year-old lady, and I can think about times when I've felt happier and had more social connections and the benefit that's had on my well-being. I think naturally people have a stronger desire to look after themselves if they feel more supported, more connected, and more important. But yes, we've certainly seen as well after sessions where managers have said people that would potentially not engage in any activities, they've slowly come round to engaging in activities in the care home, even when the children then aren't present. And then that's had a knock-on effect to other behaviours. So yeah, it's very anecdotal, but without a doubt, 100%. And a lot of people living with dementia often particularly forget to drink. And we've done a few sessions where we've actually encouraged parents to go into the care home and get the children's drinks out. So the children are actually going around giving residents a little cheers and encouraging them to drink. And so there's so many things you can do to. We've done it as well where we've had school children eating with residents in care homes, and we've seen people who ordinarily wouldn't eat as much and actually struggle with the ability to feed themselves. That's actually improved because they've watched younger people, and it's maybe empowered them a little more to try a bit harder rather than let people doing things for them. I think one of the things I fell into with my grandmother is I probably tried a little bit too hard. I probably did a bit too much for her at times. And ideally, you don't want to do that. You want to keep people doing things independently for as long as possible. And again, when children are there, children also need assistance and help. So I think being next to a child, it can just, draw out a lot of extra things. So I think it would affect lots of other behaviours. Be interesting to look at that in a lot more depth, actually. It's improved sleep as well. So we hear a lot about residents when they've had a session where children have been in the care home, they've been a lot calmer during the night, they've slept better, they've slept right through.
Yeah. So I think there's plenty of conversations to be had around evaluation and how we can help with that in the Institute in a kind of a rigorous, sort of well-considered way.
Definitely.
Yeah. Brilliant. Any comments, any questions? Yeah, please feel free to just unmute yourself or turn your camera on, or put any comments in the chat box.
Kelly, I've got a question. Thank you for that presentation. It was fantastic, and your work is amazing and very inspiring. I just wondered, are there other similar charities across the UK that do similar, or are you hoping to expand across kind of the region and then more across the UK? Or what's your...
So there are a few different organisations around, particularly a couple in London. What I've found so far is there's a few charities that do similar things. So we've done things like Sing, Rhyme and Move, where we have parents and babies sat in a circle in the care home, and then the residents in the perimeter, around the perimeter, taking part in a musical session together. And I know there's a group down in London called Songs and Smiles. I've met the founder of that organisation that does that as well. The one thing I haven't found is a charity quite as diverse as us. Because of how I operate, I'm willing to try anything. I think you can do absolutely anything intergenerationally. We've done science experiments and made that intergenerational. During the lockdown last year, in Halloween, we did intergenerational virtual trick-or-treating, where residents held up a door that they'd drawn, and the children had to pretend to knock on the door. So I think anything's possible. So I haven't seen any other organisations that don't just stick to very much one thing, whether that's a music group or connecting a school and a care home, whereas we try and do as much as possible, because I believe, it all carries weight, and some services aren't appropriate or as easy for certain places. So we try and make it as diverse as possible, and literally will pretty much try anything. And in terms of us expanding as a charity, it's a complicated one, because at times I strongly believe that we should be across the UK having the impact we do in Norfolk. That's not always that easy, and certainly from a financial perspective, we're still a small organisation. Our funds were hit by about 40% during the pandemic. We're coming out of that, but it's difficult, isn't it, when you're in the early stages? But I think one of the things I've realised now is that potentially we're better staying in East Anglia, making sure what we do here is across the board, so the whole of Norfolk's care homes have this sort of intergenerational interaction, and we get it right in Norfolk first and then expand from there. So it's kind of a wait and see, but for now I think we'll be concentrating more on this area, but I think it should be happening everywhere.
Sounds wise. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, Kelly. Charles.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. That was absolutely fascinating. And I would urge you to get some qualitative or quantitative analyzable data so that you can, start to get some funding, some more funding for this. I have a question which might fill you with horror, but I do think it's something that we need to think about. So there's an awful lot of interest in robotics in social care at the moment and within the care home environment. And I'd be really interested to get your thoughts on that. I'm not suggesting for a moment that a robot and a small child provide the same level of social interaction, but I would be interested to get your thoughts on, do you think there's any value in trying to create robots that do simulate human interaction in some way? Based on your experience, would you predict that would have any beneficial effect at all?
That question doesn't fill me with horror at all, Charles. I'm a firm believer that we should try anything and everything. I don't think children are just the answer. For me personally, I've always thought that in the care sector, particularly care homes, children, animals and music, I'm yet to come across a person that one of those things doesn't benefit, who lives in a care home, from my own experience. And at times we've tried to incorporate them. So we've had, for example, the miniature donkeys in care homes with the children and a music session, and it's been pretty full on. But No, I think I'm very much of the mind that you should try anything, and computers and robots and things like that aren't things that the older generation or people living with dementia might remember or be as used to, but it's completely fascinating. And the stuff we've done during the pandemic, where we've done Zoom calls and we've done intergenerational quizzes between schools and care homes, obviously we were unsure how the older generation would take to that, and the care homes previously really haven't been as far advanced in technology as they should have been to support families, but the pandemic forced them to do that a little bit more. But the older generation just found it marvelous. They thought it was brilliant that they could see this little visitor that they would normally see weekly, see them less frequently, but see them on a screen, and that must engage a new part of the brain that potentially they haven't before, because they're learning potentially something completely new. I mean, it would be different, wouldn't it? We know it's different ourselves, interacting with a robot than a human, but no, 100%. I think anything's worth a try. And people in care homes are so different. Not everyone in a care home wants to see a child come in. Not every, and we've got people that stay in their own bedrooms. Some people through choice, some people because they're that unhappy and depressed, and they're the people we don't want to be in their room. But those that are happy in their own company and want to be in their room, that's fine. But again, the more diverse activities and options we can find in care home, the better. So, and I think you'd definitely find someone that would be very intrigued by that. We've got people in care homes that have probably been mechanics their whole life, and different things like that, and academics, and we've got old school teachers. So yeah.
Thanks, Kelly. I just have one final comment here before we hand over to Jean, and it's from Claire. Claire says, thank you, Kelly, for your presentation. Are you familiar with the work of Kathleen Lane at the university, who has experience of qualitative research in intergenerational work in care homes? So if you're not familiar with Kathleen, we can hook you up with Kathleen.
Yeah, please do.
And Claire has a question also. It's about risk assessment. So when you take children into care homes, is there a lot of red tape and protocol around risk assessment?
Yeah, it's kind of a managed thing, and coming from an educational setting, obviously in schools we've got lots of parameters that we have to work within around safeguarding. When I first set this up, I was petrified. I would walk around a care home with a parent, and I would think, if that child leaves that toy and someone trips over it, or if there's a tablet on the floor, there's risk in everything we do. I think the first thing we have to acknowledge is that exact point, there's risk in everything we do. The impact that children in care homes have on well-being, to me, in a million times over, offsets any potential risks. But it's a very safeguarded environment. This is why at the moment we haven't expanded our little visitors scheme into the community. When we start looking at a local parent taking a child into someone's own home in the community, there is a lot more risk there, and that would probably need a lot more funding and research for us to manage safely. But when children are going into a care home environment, the parents in advance are aware and read information that helps them make sure the child is acting appropriately and being safe. I'll be honest, there has been only a couple of times, but there've been a couple of parents where it's become quite clear they were quite happy to go into a care home, sit down, let their child do whatever, and saw it as free childcare. And I discussed it with the home, and those people, we just said, it has to be a safe environment. But ultimately, when a child and a parent go into a care home, the care home manager and the staff there, it's their responsibility to look after the older people. They shouldn't be leaving people unattended. So they're safeguarding their environment, and the parent should be safeguarding their child. So I think generally with this sort of thing, we're lucky as well. You get the right people. The majority of the time, they're people that want to go there, want to have a benefit. If we do other events, we look at more intense risk assessments. But in reality, I don't think there's as much to worry about than I first thought. But as long as we keep the dialect open between our volunteers and the care services that we enter, but we've had no major issues so far, and I hope that continues.
Kelly, thanks a million. Really, really inspirational stuff. Now for the second half, and I'll apologise in advance, I'm interviewing today, so I have to shoot off just before 1, and Anna has kindly agreed to handle Jean's questions. I'm going to hand over to Jean now, Jean Craig, who's a colleague of ours in the medical school. And Jean's going to tell us all about how to write, in a really important area for a researcher, how to write a good grant bid. And just a little bit of background on Jean. Jean has a clinical background in nursing. Her main area of research is conducting systematic reviews in the area of diet, medicine management, supportive care, and substance misuse in adults, and very much contributing to national clinical guidelines. She's worked as a research advisor with the NIHR Research Design Services East of England for over 10 years now. And she's also a member of the Trial Adoption Group for Norwich CTU. So Jean, thanks for coming along to speak to us, and over to you.
Thank you very much. I will just share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, indeed.
Great, thanks very much. And just a quick, I just wanted to start off just to say to Kelly that I can see there could be some mileage involving a fellowship application to do some preliminary work towards setting up a larger study to provide evidence for what Kelly's doing. I can see that could be a really nice fellowship, like a doctoral research project to come out of it. And a lot of the funding streams are very interested in social care outcomes as well as health outcomes. And I think it's something to think through, and I'd be very happy to be involved in any discussions if that's the route things go down. Okay, so can you hear me all right, everybody?
Yeah.
So actually, the title I was given was What Not to Do When Writing a Grant Application. So that's what I'm going to think about. So I work with research advisors across the east of England. Some of our research panel members, so I sit on Big C, my colleagues are on NIHR Research for Patient Benefit or fellowship funding panels. All of us have observed one or more funding panels and looked at how projects and applications are assessed. We also get to see feedback from peer reviewers and from the funders, both for unsuccessful and successful applications. So when I was invited to talk to this topic, I immediately contacted all my colleagues and asked them to draw on their experiences and tell me just the one thing that was the top of their list in what not to do when developing a research grant. And that's what I'm going to talk you through. So I hope that'll be helpful. My colleagues all agreed with me that top of the list of things to avoid is failure to present a strong case for the research. Really, if the panel aren't inspired by the idea, if they don't see its importance, then it won't get past the first hurdle. And not even the most robust, wonderful methods can save it. So I guess the key point is that it's vital to never assume that the panel will be as excited about your idea as you are. And the very best applications present a compelling and a well-crafted story, and importantly, that it's written to the educated lay person, not assuming any knowledge of the clinical area, of the methodology, and really building that story in a way that carries the reviewers along with you. So it's important to remember that the panel members may not have any experience of the clinical topic or even the methodology. So importance is crucial, getting across the message that this is an important project. And just I just wanted to flag up two recent National Institute for Health Research funding calls. So one of them, the NIHR recognizes the importance of research priorities that have been identified by the James Lind Alliance priority setting partnerships, which you may or may not be aware of, but these are partnerships between clinicians, patients, carers, policymakers, etc., that prioritize key research topics in specific clinical areas. So they haven't covered all areas, and they don't necessarily come up with a very defined research question. In fact, they don't, but they come up with topic areas that are prioritized as most important for research. So NIHR are putting out a call right now saying that they're interested in receiving high quality applications which address these topics. They're also interested in receiving applications that meet recommendations in the NICE guidance that has been published or updated since 2015. So that's their NIHR NICE rolling call. Got a very broad remit: clinical, social care, public health, technology appraisals, interventional procedures, diagnostics. So I think what I'm saying is that if your research area matches with those priorities in the James Lind Alliance or the NICE guidance, then half of the work of selling the importance is already done. Just thinking about the need for the research, I'm quoting verbatim here from a program director on a failed application who said, "This is too close to similar studies and would not add significantly to existing knowledge." And that project was bounced back straight away. Absolutely heartbreaking feedback for the team who'd spent almost a year developing the application, when perhaps all that they needed to do was for the existing and ongoing research to be flagged up and a clear explanation given of why there is clear water between their study and those studies. I think it's worth being aware that many funding programs have a team that are set to work as soon as applications are received to see if there are any studies negating the need for this new proposed study. Thinking about the plausibility of research, I'm just going to make one comment about complex problems and research that's stressing complexity, such as behavioral aspects. One really useful technique that we often suggest to people is that they develop a logic model, which can help the research team to clearly describe the problem in its component parts, the proposed solutions, the mechanisms by which those solutions are assumed to work, and then the anticipated outcomes. And to be able to put that all into one document, one page, it makes a really good tool for working up a grant and for thinking through each of those and helping the panel to understand that the complexities have definitely been taken into consideration. So although you're often not allowed to upload multiple additional documents, you could incorporate that within as part of the grant application within the main text. It's really helpful. Achievable, the panels are really looking for evidence that this is indeed deliverable. And a really useful approach in the application is to list the risks that you have identified and the steps that you plan to take to mitigate these. And sometimes by doing this, this might lead you to revise the question altogether. So for example, you might change to doing intervention development rather than proposing that you will evaluate the intervention. So it's a really useful step to try and come up with all the risks that you can possibly think of. Definitely you need to show that the research is timely. So is it right for the here and now? And of course you could strike lucky. When I first started in post back in 2010, I remember working with an ENT specialist and his interest was in loss of smell post-viral infections. And I worked with him on numerous attempts for funding. He had numerous unsuccessful applications. The importance of the study was always questioned. Hey presto, COVID comes along and he submits a grant, which by now was the perfect grant, and he had success. It was funded by the NIHR Research for Patient Benefit in November 2020. And 2 or 3 days ago, I heard about it on the BBC News saying that this new study has been started up at James Padgett Hospital looking at whether vitamin A can help people who have lost their sense of smell after COVID. So, yep, sometimes timing is lucky, but really it's about helping the panel understand that the time for the research is now. Also to think about is future-proofing it. So it takes such a long time to develop a grant application, win the money, get to the point where you haven't analyzed the results and have an output. Is that finding, are those findings still going to be relevant given a fast-moving environment of research where maybe their technological development really researched and relevant for the future? And all I can say is make a very hard sell. It's a marketing business. You're in the marketing business for this. And the better you can write, the better you can do it. Next up on my colleagues' list was utter despair at muddled or inconsistent aims and methods. And it's very easy to understand how this happens. New applicants are brought into the research team as the application evolves. And yeah, the topic grows. But what can happen is that by the time it gets submitted, The reviewer reads the background information. They think they've grasped the aims and objectives. Then they get to the methods, and it appears that additional or different objectives are being addressed by method. Then they get to the analysis plan, can completely ignore some of the objectives and only partially provides data for some of the objectives. So it's really worth looking at that very carefully and before you submit. Unclear aims and objectives are also problematic. And it's really worth thinking that reviewers like PICO. So the question or the aim elucidated in the way these examples have been given. If the aim is well written and sufficiently detailed, it gives an instant understanding of what the project will do, and it should be able to stand alone. So the last point on that slide, I've just given an example of a really detailed intervention. So instead of just writing in the aim, the intervention is to reduce falls, this is a more detailed description of what the intervention is, and it's good signposting for the whole project. And it's clear that it's completely understood what the methods will be, how the intervention will look. And you could be even more detailed and say, how frequently would that intervention take place, etc. A very common problem or common issue that causes problems with the application is when people, I've called it jumping to the fix. So coming up with a solution rather than without really having looked at the problem. So in innovation terms, you could think of this as looking for a market for a product that you already have, rather than developing a product for a gap in the market. So it's sort of working backwards, and it's much harder to be successful. And the reason for that is because all sorts of questions emerge that may not get addressed properly in the application. So whether there are perhaps simpler ways of solving the problem, because the investigator already had their problem that was fixed in their mind, whether there are alternative solutions that are already available, whether the problem has even been properly researched and the correct solution come up with. Often vital team members are ignored, or the design is flawed as a result because of a lack of understanding of the complexities of the clinical situation. So it's really worth spending a lot of time getting an in-depth understanding of the current problem, the current treatments, the current care pathways, to be absolutely clear that when you're designing the intervention, if it is an interventional study, that it's taken account of all the context and that it really is going to be right. So I think back to this logic model that I was talking about, where you're teasing out all aspects of the problem, and then that can help you think through what the intervention should be, rather than just taking something off the shelf and then saying it's going to sort this problem out. I endlessly came up with 4 flaws in methods, and the key things are them being unspecified or inadequate. So just to mention a few points, so overestimating recruitment is a big no-no, and it's a frequently cited criticism by funding panels. So it's really important to show that you've found out and shown how many eligible patients are in the system, how they will be identified, and the treatment plan is indeed plausible. And importantly, consider why they would say no and have a contingency plan. We see endless feedback from panels. The time frame is unrealistic. The recruitment rates are unrealistic. Thinking about where the data are going to come from, funders understandably don't like us duplicating data collection. I don't know where I cut out, but what I wanted to say was the bit about be green. It's worth pointing this out. There's a big drive in the NIHR, rightfully so, to reduce research waste. And at the point of developing your grant applications, it's really worth thinking how green you are. So if it's going to be an unsuccessful submission, what a huge amount of waste of resources, of post time, patients' time, the peer reviewer's time, if the study is not deliverable, if the study is not really wanted. So it's really thinking at each stage, how green, really be green, make sure it's the right question driven by patients, carers, clinicians, social need, by a true gap in current knowledge, that the outputs have a potential to make a real difference. Make sure it's at the right stage. So if you're proposing to go straight for a full-scale trial, is there a risk that there are too many unknowns, that that trial is just not going to work and you've wasted, I don't know, £1 million, who knows? Or if you're planning to go for a feasibility study to try to do the preliminary work and to understand the design of the future trial, are you actually wasting the data collect could have been gleaned from existing trials, and you could have designed that study had you done more homework from the existing evidence already out there. Have you used an efficient design? So, for example, in randomized controlled trials, aim for more than understanding whether an intervention is effective in improving X outcome. Instead, also include process evaluation to understand the outcomes, to clarify contextual factors associated with variation in the outcomes. Or you might even include a study within that randomized controlled trial to understand more about methodology. So, for example, which of two recruitment methods is best for a particular population. And some funders have additional money in order for you to do those studies within a trial, or SWATs. The other thing about being green is ferreting out any problem areas and exposing them and thinking how to overcome them, not ignoring them or hiding them, and then the study collapses when it's actually underway. So I think we're all keen to be green in your research. Okay. Another problem area and a big no-no is failing to show the route to patient benefit, or benefit to the NHS, benefit to social care, benefit to the carers. It's very hard for reviewers to understand that if they're not in your clinical field. So right from the background, when you're setting out the need for the research, that should be angled towards, this is the need, and furthermore, if we did X, Y, Z, the potential benefit could be the following. But it's more than that, it's thinking through how this could actually be implemented in practice, the findings. So if the study is successful, what and who is the conduit for translating it into practice? How does it get implemented? And so having the people on your team right at the time of developing the application to start thinking through implementation in every step is vital. Also thinking through, are there any existing processes that would facilitate adoption of the intervention or whatever it is you're doing into practice, and show that there is a knowledge of systems, of how healthcare works, systems within the healthcare process or the social care setting that would allow the findings of the study to be easily implemented. So there's a lot to think about route to impact, route to benefit, and every funding panel that I'm aware of, every charity I'm aware of, it's one of the key things they're assessing at the time of grants being submitted to see whether they're willing to fund it. You don't want your research to be a purely academic exercise or seen as that. A hot topic for National Institute of Health Research is the risk of us ignoring underserved populations. So there's a big push to avoid widening health inequalities in research. There's guidance for applicants on equality, diversity, and inclusion for study participants. And the guidance for the National Institute of Health Research says every person eligible to take part in the research should be offered the same opportunity of taking part in the research, regardless of geographical location, age, disability, etc. And we know that many groups are underserved by research. They have lower representation in research than would be expected from population estimates. We know that areas with high healthcare burden are not all matched by a high volume of research. living in care homes, they may be socially disadvantaged, language barriers, etc., may have no fixed address. And the NIHR is absolutely clear that researchers must take steps to be inclusive and to avoid inadvertently excluding groups. So reviewers and funding panels are looking to see this has been done. And at each step of the research, it's worth carefully considering that you wouldn't be inadvertently excluding people. So perhaps the intervention is not able to be used by certain groups. You've automatically excluded them from the study. So it's really important to keep thinking all of those factors through. Paying lip service to PPI is a big no-no. So embedded throughout PPI, patient and public involvement in the development and conduct of research, and these are people who aren't participants but are helping to frame and to develop the whole project and to run the project in some cases. And just one point that one of my colleagues came up and said, too often discussion groups are limited to 1 hour with patients and public to help them design the study. And often it's dominated by the researcher explaining the research. So there's no open-ended questions. And one of my colleagues said, involving patients is not about asking a few patients a question in such a way that you get the answer you want. And hopefully we're not doing that, but it's not obvious from applications that concerted efforts have been made to really get good input from patients so that the study is one that is needed and that is likely to be successful, given how it's going to be run and delivered. I won't say much about the team, but failing to have co-applicants representing all disciplines involved in a study is not very helpful. So an example is in a study investigating an exercise intervention that's currently underway in cancer patients. The interventions are to be delivered and supervised by physiotherapists, but there isn't a physiotherapist on the ground. And now that the trial's underway, there has to be rapid learning about the practicalities of delivering exercise in the NHS setting. There's a physiologist on board, but that's not the same as the physiotherapist who understands the practicalities. So it's really about involving all the right people. Development application. I think this is my last slide, really, and we see this. I've been quite harsh in my words, but some investigators appear to have a disregard for reviewers and do this at your peril. So these are grantsmanship type points. So if all there is relentless, dense text with no use of paragraphs, little punctuation, too much editing, so that being removed, and it's difficult to for hundreds of abbreviations because you're trying to squeeze in as much information, and so everything becomes abbreviated. The peer reviewers hate it, and I've been observing a panel where a peer reviewer said, I'm sorry, I stopped reading it, and I know I haven't given it due consideration, but it's too difficult to read. So that's somebody who has allowed themselves to be booted out before they've even had a proper reading of it. It's a big risk to assume that any of the panel will understand what you're talking about. I've spoken about how important it is to craft a careful story and carry the reviewers along that journey with you. Gaps in information, don't assume knowledge, and often it's left to the reviewer to understand where the problem areas are and to raise them. Far better for you to flag up the problem areas, make a big show and dance about them, and say how they're going to be mitigated. So all of this takes a huge amount of time, and I think the key thing is don't rush. And if there is a funding call that seems absolutely 100% matched to your particular area, but it's a very general call, and that's so it's not asking for one specific question. It's saying we're looking for research in this general area and we're interested in finding out what you're going to ask, what questions you're going to ask. Then don't feel you have to rush to meet that deadline. because what they're really doing is saying, we want research in this area because it's an underserved researched area. So whether you hit that deadline or a later deadline is not so serious. The very important thing is to get the very best application you can. I've put up as my last slide just how you can contact us, or you can email me direct. And we help with applied research. We don't have skills in our team for basic science animal research. We are a team of mixed methodologists. So we have health economists, we've got statisticians, we've got qualitative researchers, experts in process evaluation, trialists, etc., systematic reviewers. We don't have clinical expertise in our team, but we can help with methodology. And the way we work is you contact us when you have your research question clearly elucidated. So you've done some work on the background, understanding the question, and then we can join your team meetings. We can review the grant application as it progresses. We can connect you up with other members of the team. We can help build your team, signpost you to the important places you need to go. We can run mock interviews for you if that funding panel requires a full interview. We can do pre-submission panels where we look at your application when it's just about ready to go in. So yeah, feel free to contact us if we might be able to fulfill your needs. And I think that's all. I'll stop sharing.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Jean, and for bearing with the technology issues. That was absolutely fascinating, and I loved the way you approached it by asking fellow reviewers, the worst case scenarios with some of the grants. That was absolutely brilliant and really helpful. I have to say I did cringe occasionally at some of the mistakes maybe I've made, but really, really helpful. I'm conscious of time, but it would be great if we had any questions. I have to say you answered my question on that very last slide, because I was going to ask you about the support available. But does anybody else have any questions or comments? Charles, wonderful.
I just wanted to echo what Jean said. That was fantastic. Thank you very much. So I've chaired grant panels continuously for 20 years. And the mistake people make is they think that the reviewers will actually read the grant application in full. As you've said very clearly, they won't. Unless you make it really, really easy to read, it won't get read in full. And the use of subtitles, I think, is really important. And I like judicious bolding within each paragraph to identify the absolutely key point that paragraph makes. And I like the use of pictures to show experimental strategy or trial strategy or something like that. Just things, and you said this, Jean, just to emphasize it, it's all about making it an easier read for the reviewer. If you do that, you're 3/4 of the way there. But if you present, as you said, just an incomprehensible block of text without any paragraph breaks or anything, you're dead in the water.
Thank you. I shall be adding those to my list, of which I have very, very many comments, and it's huge. But yeah, it's amazing how general school training goes out the window when people are writing these applications, because they so want to put in so much information that the quality of presentation gets ignored, and that's problematic. Thank you for those comments.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. Thank you ever so much, Jean, and for everyone hanging on in there for the end.
Yes, sorry about my connectivity.
No problem at all, Jean. We're really appreciative, and thank you, everyone, and we'll see you on the 5th of November, if not before. Take care.